He lived alone in a small apartment on the edge of the city. The building was old with creaky wooden floors and faded walls, but it was all he could afford. The windows were dusty, letting in only a little sunlight, and the balcony overlooked a narrow street where people hurried by every day, lost in their own lives. Most of the time he didn't feel lonely because he had the piano. It was an upright piano that had belonged to his grandmother. The wood was scratched and worn, and some of the keys didn't work properly, but to him it was more than just an instrument. It was a companion, a friend, and a way to speak when words failed. Every evening after finishing his shift at the cafe, he would come home with tired feet and aching shoulders. He would make himself a cup of tea, sit by the piano, and play. Sometimes he played fast, lively pieces that made him forget the long day. Other times he played soft, slow melodies that echoed the sadness he kept hidden from the world. The neighbors could hear the music drifting through the walls, but no one really knew who he was or why he played. They just assumed someone lived alone with a piano, filling the quiet apartment with sound. He didn't mind. He liked the privacy, the sense of being invisible while still being able to express everything inside him. He had never taken formal lessons. His grandmother had taught him some basics when he was a child, and then it was all on his own. He had spent countless hours teaching himself, watching old videos, reading books, and listening to recordings over and over. His fingers had learned the piano through repetition and feeling. Music became a language he understood better than the words around him. Even when life was hard, even when money was tight and the city felt cold and uncaring, the piano made everything feel lighter. On weekends, he sometimes wandered through the streets of the city, carrying a small notebook where he jotted down ideas for melodies. He would sit on a bench in the park or near the river, listening to the sounds of the city and imagining how they could become music. The rhythm of footsteps, the honking of distant cars, the laughter of children, it all became notes in his mind. He had a strange ability to turn ordinary sounds into something beautiful, but most people walked by, unaware of the symphony happening quietly in someone's head. Friends were few. He had one or two who knew he played the piano, but they didn't understand how much it meant to him. They invited him to parties, dinners, and gatherings, but he often declined. Social situations drained him. It was easier to be alone with the piano than to explain the music in his head to people who didn't listen in the same way. And so, day after day, he went about his routine. Cafe work during the day, piano at night, sleep, repeat. Life seemed small, but in those hours at the piano it felt vast. Sometimes he would play until his fingers hurt. He didn't notice the time passing. The sun would rise, casting pale light into the apartment, and he would finally stop, exhausted but happy. The melodies lingered in the air, filling the corners of the room with something intangible, a warmth that no furniture or decorations could provide. At those moments he felt connected to something bigger, even if he didn't know exactly what it was. Music was his secret world, a world that existed beyond the struggles, the bills, and the endless gray city. Neighbors occasionally commented on the music. A woman in the apartment below would tap on the ceiling saying, "Beautiful but too loud sometimes." A man across the hall would nod with appreciation when their paths crossed. But there was no real conversation about the music itself. They didn't ask who played it or why. He didn't mind. The music wasn't for recognition. It was for him, and that was enough. It was a private dialogue between his heart and the piano, a dialogue that no one else could truly understand. He also had dreams, small ones he rarely spoke about. He wanted to record his music, to see it reach people outside his little apartment, but fear held him back. He worried that if anyone really heard him, they would judge or misunderstand. The thought of rejection was terrifying, so he played in secret, pouring all his emotions into melodies that never left the walls of his apartment. Some nights he imagined a large concert hall filled with people, listening intently as he played. The idea made him smile and shiver at the same time. He didn't know if it would ever happen, but the dream gave him hope. His life had not been easy. He had grown up in a small town, in a family that struggled to make ends meet. The piano had been the one constant in his life, something beautiful in a world that often felt harsh and unfair. When he moved to the city, he had left most of his possessions behind, but he had brought the piano. It was heavy and awkward to move, but he insisted. Some people might have seen it as impractical, even foolish, but to him it was priceless. It was a piece of his past, a memory of his grandmother and a symbol of all the music he had yet to create. In the cafe where he worked, he was quiet and polite. He didn't draw attention to himself. Customers remembered him mostly for his smile and calm demeanor. Coworkers sometimes asked about his life, but he kept answers short. He didn't lie, but he didn't volunteer details either. His heart belonged to the piano, not to idle conversations. After long shifts, when he returned to the apartment, the piano awaited him like a loyal friend, ready to listen without judgment. Some nights, when the city was particularly quiet, he would play for hours without pause. He improvised, letting feelings guide his fingers rather than notes on a page. Sometimes the music was joyous, sometimes sad, sometimes angry. The apartment was filled with echoes of his emotions, and he felt lighter after each session. In these moments, he forgot about bills, loneliness, and the constant hum of the city. Only the piano and he existed, and for a while that was enough. One particular evening, after an exhausting day at work, he sat down at the piano and began to play softly. The notes were hesitant at first, almost shy, as if he were unsure if he should let his feelings spill out. But soon the music gained confidence. He played a melody that rose and fell like the waves of a river, each note carrying a fragment of his soul. He closed his eyes and let the sound guide him. The tea he had brewed grew cold on the table beside him. Outside, the city moved on without noticing. But in his small apartment, time seemed to stop. He played for hours, and when he finally stopped, he felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. The room was silent, yet it felt full of memories, dreams, and unspoken words. He leaned back on the piano bench, letting his hands rest, and took a deep breath. Even though no one outside these walls would ever hear this music, he felt that somehow it mattered. Somehow the melodies had reached beyond him, touching a part of the world that was invisible but real. Sometimes, late at night, he imagined what it would be like if someone did hear him. What if someone listened and understood the emotions behind each note? What if his music could reach faraway places, far beyond the small apartment and the narrow street? The thought was exciting and frightening at the same time. He shook his head and smiled softly. For now, the music was his secret, and maybe that was exactly how it was meant to be. He had always thought of his piano playing as a private affair. It was something he did for himself, to release emotions he could not speak, to touch the silent corners of his own heart. But one evening, everything began to change in a way he could never have imagined. It started when a friend who occasionally visited his apartment noticed the music. The friend had always admired the melodies, the subtle emotion, the way each note seemed to tell a story. On that particular night, the friend pulled out his phone and asked if he could record a few minutes. He hesitated, unsure if it was a good idea, but after some gentle encouragement, he agreed. The music that had lived only in his apartment and his own heart was recorded for the first time. He did not know the implications. The video was short, just a few minutes of him playing a soft melody that rose and fell like the tide. He watched as his friend uploaded it online, almost casually, with a few words praising the music. He felt a mix of excitement and fear. The idea of strangers hearing his music made him uneasy. What if they didn't understand? What if they laughed or criticized? He pushed the thoughts aside and tried to forget about it. In his mind, the music was sacred and the world was noisy and careless. Yet a part of him was curious to see what would happen. Days passed, and at first nothing seemed to change. He went about his routine, work at the cafe, coming home, playing the piano late into the night. He kept telling himself it was just a small clip, a tiny ripple in the vast ocean of the internet, unlikely to make any difference. But then something strange happened. His phone began to buzz with notifications. People were sharing the video. Comments started to appear, praising the music, calling it beautiful, extraordinary, and deeply moving. He read the messages carefully, trying to remain calm, but his heart raced. Some comments were thoughtful, describing how the music touched people in unexpected ways. Others were simple, just a line of admiration. Each word left a mark on him, as if the music he had always kept hidden had finally found its audience. At first, he didn't tell anyone at work. He didn't want the attention, the questions, or the awkwardness. But his friend kept nudging him, showing screenshots of people responding to the video. "Look at this," he said one evening, showing a long string of messages from strangers who had shared the clip and praised the performance. "People are really noticing you. Your music is reaching them." He felt a strange mix of pride and fear. It was thrilling yet terrifying. The piano had always been his safe space. Now it seemed to be stepping into the world, and he was not sure if he was ready. The video spread quietly at first, mostly shared among people who appreciated music. Musicians commented on the technique, the emotion, the phrasing. Non-musicians wrote about how the piece had made them pause and reflect, how it had made them feel something they could not explain. He would scroll through these messages late at night, sometimes smiling, sometimes overwhelmed. It was as if his music had taken on a life of its own, separate from him, speaking directly to hearts he could never meet. The realization was both beautiful and frightening. He began to notice subtle changes in his day-to-day life. Occasionally, strangers would approach him at the cafe, saying they recognized him from the video. He would blush, mumble thanks, and retreat. It was strange to feel known, even if just slightly, by people who had never met him. He didn't seek attention, yet here it was, arriving uninvited. He had to adjust, to remind himself that the music was still his own. The applause, though unseen and distant, was a reminder that what he had poured into those notes mattered. The confidence that came with the recognition was new. He began experimenting more with his playing, improvising pieces that he had never dared to attempt before. He played with more courage, letting feelings guide his fingers rather than focusing on perfection. The piano, once a safe hiding place, became a bridge to expression and creativity. The melodies grew richer, deeper, more layered. He started to see possibilities beyond the walls of his apartment, imagining his music reaching wider audiences, evoking emotions in strangers as it had in him. Late one night, as he played, he felt a strange energy in the room. He was improvising a melody when a sudden idea struck him. A chord progression, soft yet resonant, carrying a sense of hope and longing. He followed it instinctively, letting the music take shape without thinking. Hours passed unnoticed. The room was filled with sound, the piano singing stories he had never told anyone. By the time he stopped, the quiet felt heavier than usual, filled with echoes of what had just happened. He realized that his music was growing, evolving, becoming more than he had imagined. And somewhere beyond his walls, people were hearing it. One afternoon, he received a message from an unfamiliar account. It was brief, polite, and to the point, asking if he would consider performing at a small local event. He stared at it for a long time, unsure what to do. The idea of performing in front of strangers made his stomach twist. He had never played outside his apartment, never before a live audience. And yet he could not ignore the possibility. After some thought, he replied cautiously, agreeing to the performance. He did not tell anyone at work, not wanting the attention or questions. The piano had opened a door, and he was taking the first step into a world he had only imagined. The days leading to the event were filled with preparation, practice, and quiet anxiety. He played the same pieces repeatedly, refining details, experimenting with timing and expression. He imagined the room, the audience, the sound of the piano in a larger space. It was different from the solitary nights at home. Yet the thought of sharing his music, even for a small audience, filled him with a strange hope. Maybe, just maybe, the music that had lived only in his apartment could touch someone in the world beyond. The night of the performance arrived. He carried his sheet music carefully and entered the small venue, a modest room with a dozen or so seats and a simple stage. The lights were dim, the atmosphere calm but expectant. He sat up, adjusted the bench, and took a deep breath. The piano felt different under his fingers, more alive, as if it knew that this was the first time it would speak to strangers. His heart raced, but as he began to play, the familiar comfort of the instrument returned. The melodies flowed naturally, rising and falling with emotion, capturing the quiet energy of his private practice in a new, shared space. The audience was quiet, listening intently. He noticed a few heads leaning slightly forward, eyes focused, some with small smiles or expressions of wonder. He felt the music connecting, not just as sound, but as a bridge between his inner world and theirs. For the first time, he understood that his music had power beyond his apartment, beyond himself. Each note seemed to reach someone, to touch something hidden inside them. It was both exhilarating and humbling. By the end of the performance, the small crowd erupted in applause. It was not a grand concert hall, but the impact was immense for him. He felt a rush of joy and relief, a validation that the music he had nurtured in private could indeed resonate with others. People came forward to shake his hand, compliment him, and ask about his compositions. He smiled shyly, answering as best he could, feeling a warmth that was new and unfamiliar. The piano had not only been his companion, but now had become a messenger, carrying emotions to hearts he had never known. That night, as he walked back to his apartment, he felt a quiet sense of transformation. The world seemed slightly larger, more connected, more full of possibilities. He thought about the video online, about the small ripple it had created and how it had led him to this moment. The fear and hesitation still lingered, but there was a new layer of confidence growing, a belief that perhaps his music had a place beyond the walls of his apartment. He opened the door, stepped inside, and sat at the piano. The keys were familiar, comforting, and yet something had changed. The music now had an audience, real or imagined, and he played with the sense that someone somewhere was listening and feeling the same emotions he poured into every note. It was the beginning of something new, a journey he had never dared to dream but could now see unfolding before him. Late one night, far across the city, a man in a spacious apartment sat alone in front of a large computer screen. He was a billionaire, known not just for his business success but for his passion for the arts. Sleep eluded him as it often did, and he found himself scrolling through music videos online, searching for something that could spark inspiration or soothe the quiet unrest of his mind. He had heard countless compositions, attended numerous concerts, and yet he still longed for something different, something that felt raw, authentic, and alive. His eyes scanned the screen until a small video caught his attention. The title was simple, almost unremarkable, but the music within was anything but ordinary. He clicked play. The camera angle showed only a pair of hands moving gracefully over the piano keys. The melody began softly, almost shyly, and then it grew with emotion, rising and falling in waves. Each note carried a sense of depth, a mix of longing, sorrow, and hope. He leaned closer to the screen, mesmerized. The music seemed alive, as if it were speaking directly to him. He had never experienced anything like it in a long time. It was not the perfection of the notes that captivated him, but the soul behind them. Every pause, every touch of a key seemed to reveal the pianist's heart. He watched intently, feeling a connection that was both immediate and profound. The billionaire replayed the video several times, unable to stop. He paused, rewound, and listened again. He noticed small imperfections in the keys, the slight hesitation in a few notes, and yet it only added to the beauty. It was real, unpolished, and moving. He could sense that this music was coming from someone who had lived, who had felt deeply, and who used the piano not just as an instrument, but as a voice. He was intrigued. Who was this person? Where could he find them? The music seemed too intimate, too personal to have been produced for the world. It was as if the pianist was speaking to him alone. His curiosity turned into determination. He asked his assistant to trace the video, to find out who the pianist was. The assistant worked quietly, following digital breadcrumbs, searching for contact information, and finally a small lead appeared, an email address, barely noticeable in the video description. The billionaire read it carefully and decided to send a message. It was brief and respectful, praising the music, expressing interest in meeting the pianist, and inviting them to perform at a private event. He pressed send, feeling a rare sense of anticipation. For years he had supported young artists, but this was different. This music had struck him in a way that was personal, almost profound. It was not about fame or popularity. It was about the human connection that music could create. Meanwhile, in his small apartment, the young man had no idea that his life was about to change. He continued his routine: work, music, small interactions with the few people he trusted, and quiet evenings at the piano. The video that had been uploaded months ago had grown quietly, gaining likes and shares, but he had mostly ignored it, focusing on the music itself. He was unaware that the billionaire had watched it, had been moved by it, and was taking steps to find him. Life was about to introduce a new chapter, one he could not have anticipated. Days passed, and the young man received an email from an address he did not recognize. He hesitated before opening it, unsure if it was spam or something legitimate. When he read the message, his eyes widened. The words were polite and encouraging. They spoke of the music he had shared, the emotions it conveyed, and the desire of the sender to hear it performed live at a private event. He read the email several times, trying to process what it meant. Was it real? Was someone really interested in his music? Someone with influence and experience? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. He shared the message with his friend who had recorded the video. Together, they discussed the possibility. It could be a mistake, his friend said. Or it could be a chance you can't ignore. The young man felt a whirlwind of emotions. Fear, excitement, doubt, and hope all mixed together. He had always played in solitude, never imagining that someone so influential could take notice. And yet here it was, a door opening to a world he had only dreamed of. After careful consideration, he decided to accept the invitation. It felt like stepping into a new reality, one that required courage and faith in his own talent. The days leading up to the meeting were filled with preparation and nervous anticipation. He practiced relentlessly, exploring familiar melodies and experimenting with new ones. Each evening he sat at the piano, hands trembling slightly, replaying the videos he had recorded, imagining the eyes that would watch him soon. The apartment felt different, charged with a mix of tension and hope. Even the worn keys seemed to respond to his focus, as if they understood that something important was approaching. On the day of the meeting, he dressed carefully, choosing simple clothes that were neat and presentable. He carried his sheet music and some personal compositions, unsure if he would need them. When he arrived at the venue, a luxurious yet welcoming space, he felt a mixture of awe and intimidation. The setting was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The room was filled with soft light, elegant furniture, and the gentle hum of anticipation. It was both intimidating and inspiring, a perfect reflection of the moment itself. When he finally met the billionaire, he was struck by the calm presence of the man, who greeted him warmly and with genuine interest. There was no pretense, no pressure to perform perfectly. Instead, the billionaire encouraged him to play freely, to let the music guide him. The young man sat at the grand piano, feeling its smooth keys beneath his fingers, and began to play. At first, the music was cautious, tentative, but soon it flowed naturally. Every note carried the emotion he had nurtured in his apartment for years, now amplified by the grandeur of the hall and the attentive presence of someone who truly listened. As he played, he noticed the billionaire leaning forward, eyes closed, absorbed in the music. The performance was not about technical perfection. It was about connection, and he felt it deeply. Each chord, each pause, each delicate touch of the keys created an invisible bridge between the two of them. Time seemed to stretch and contract, the music filling the room and moving beyond it, touching something unseen yet profoundly felt. The young man's fingers danced over the keys, guided by intuition and emotion, and he realized that his private world had expanded into something much larger, something shared. When the final note faded, there was silence for a moment, as if the room itself were catching its breath. Then the billionaire applauded softly, a warm and sincere sound that carried more weight than any public recognition. He approached the young man and spoke with kindness and admiration, expressing how deeply moved he had been by the music. The young man felt a rush of gratitude and humility. It was a moment he had never imagined, a moment that validated years of dedication, solitude, and passion. After the meeting, as he walked back to his apartment, he could hardly believe what had happened. The city streets felt different, alive with possibility. The piano, once a private sanctuary, had connected him to someone who truly appreciated his gift. He realized that music, which had always been his way of coping with loneliness and uncertainty, could also serve as a bridge to the wider world. The experience left him with a quiet confidence, a sense that perhaps his life was no longer bound by the walls of his small apartment. There was a path ahead, one filled with potential, and it all began with a single video that someone had noticed in the quiet hours of the night. The journey was just beginning, and for the first time he felt ready to step forward. The young man had never imagined that his music would lead him to a place like this. He had spent most of his life in quiet apartments, small rooms filled with the echo of his own melodies, never performing in front of anyone. Now he was invited to a private event by the billionaire, a chance to play for an audience that had heard of him only through the internet. The invitation alone made his heart pound. It was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. He wondered if he could truly play for strangers, if his hands would betray him, if the music he had nurtured in solitude could speak in a space so different from his apartment. The days leading up to the event were a whirlwind of preparation and nerves. He practiced more than ever, repeating pieces he knew well and exploring new melodies. Each evening he sat at the piano, his fingers flying over the worn keys with a mixture of fear and excitement. He tried to imagine the room he would play in, the people who would listen, and the reactions he might receive. The thought of stepping outside the safety of his apartment was daunting, yet it was also exhilarating. For years he had dreamed of being heard beyond his walls, and now the opportunity was real. On the day of the event, he woke early, feeling a strange mixture of anticipation and anxiety. He dressed carefully, choosing simple, neat clothes that reflected who he was, yet also respected the occasion. He packed some sheet music, though he was not sure he would use it. Each step he took toward the venue felt heavier than the last, but also filled with possibility. When he arrived, the building itself impressed him. Modern, elegant, and polished, a stark contrast to his small, worn apartment. He was guided to a room where the grand piano awaited, its glossy surface gleaming under soft lights. The audience was already present, a mix of people he had never met before, quietly talking and sipping drinks. The young man felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. He had never performed in front of a crowd like this. His palms felt clammy, and he had to remind himself to breathe. The billionaire greeted him warmly, offering reassurance. "Just play as you always do," he said. "Let the music speak for itself." Those words settled him slightly. He took a deep breath, walked to the piano, and sat down. The keys felt familiar under his fingers, yet there was a weight to the moment that made them seem heavier, more significant. He began to play softly, hesitant at first, testing the room, the air, and the attention of the audience. The music started to flow naturally, a melody that was both gentle and full of emotion. As he continued, his confidence grew. Each note carried the feelings he had held inside for so long, the solitude, the longing, the dreams, and the quiet joys. He could see the audience leaning in, listening intently, their expressions showing curiosity, wonder, and emotion. The room became silent except for the piano, the sound filling every corner, touching each listener in its own way. He played pieces that he had composed himself, improvisations that had lived only in his mind and in the walls of his apartment. The music was personal, intimate, yet it resonated with everyone present. It was as if the piano was translating his heart into a language that could be understood by strangers. He felt the energy in the room shift, a sense of connection growing with every chord and every pause. Time seemed to slow, the moment stretching into something larger than life, yet delicate and fragile at the same time. The billionaire sat near the front, eyes closed, absorbing the music. There was no applause yet, no interruptions, just attentive listening. The young man could feel the presence of someone truly appreciating his music, someone who understood its depth. That awareness gave him courage. He played with more freedom, letting his emotions guide the melody rather than thinking about technique or perfection. Each note became a part of a conversation he was having with the room, a dialogue that bridged his world and the audience's. As he played, he noticed the subtle reactions of the people around him. Some were leaning forward, heads slightly tilted, eyes glistening with emotion. Others had soft smiles, recognizing the beauty and honesty in the music. The young man felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. It was a feeling of being seen, being heard, and being understood, all without words. The piano had been his companion for so long, but now it had become a messenger, conveying his soul to others in a way he had only dreamed of. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. The young man lost track of time, completely absorbed in the act of playing. The room, the audience, and even the grandeur of the hall faded into the background. It was only him, the piano, and the music flowing between them. The melodies rose and fell, gentle then bold, capturing the spectrum of his emotions. He felt lighter, freer, as if every note lifted a burden he had carried silently for years. The music was no longer just a private escape. It was a shared experience, touching hearts and minds beyond his imagination. When the final note lingered and faded into silence, there was a pause in the room, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Then came applause, soft at first, then swelling into enthusiastic claps and cheers. The young man looked up, eyes wide, overwhelmed by the reaction. He had never received recognition like this, and the feeling was both exhilarating and humbling. People came forward complimenting him, asking questions about the pieces and expressing how moved they had been. He smiled shyly, answering as best he could, Feeling a mixture of pride, disbelief, and gratitude, the billionaire approached him after the performance, a warm and genuine expression on his face. He praised the young man's talent, speaking of the depth and emotion in the music and how it had affected him personally. The young man felt a rush of humility and joy. For the first time, he realized that the music he had nurtured in solitude could reach beyond the walls of his apartment, touching real people, evoking real feelings. It was a revelation, a moment that would stay with him forever. After the event, as he walked back to his apartment, the city streets felt different, more alive and full of possibility. He thought about the journey that had led him here, the years of practice in quiet rooms, the small videos shared online, the cautious steps he had taken to accept the invitation. Each moment had built up to this experience, a bridge between his private world and the lives of others. The piano had been his companion, and now it was also his voice, his connection to the world beyond. That night, he returned home and sat at his piano once more. The keys felt familiar, comforting, yet they seemed to hold new significance. He played slowly, savoring each note, reflecting on the evening's experience. The music carried both his memories and the excitement of what was to come. For the first time, he felt a sense of direction, a belief that his music could go beyond personal expression and truly reach others. The quiet apartment, once a sanctuary, had become the starting point of something greater, a journey that promised new experiences, connections, and growth. He knew that this was only the beginning, and for the first time he felt ready to embrace it fully. The young man had played for the audience, but he could not have imagined the effect his music would have. As the final notes lingered in the air, the room remained silent for a few heartbeats, a hush of awe settling over everyone present. He felt the weight of the moment pressing gently on him, a mixture of relief, wonder, and vulnerability. The music he had spent countless nights nurturing in solitude had finally spoken to others, and he could sense the impact in the expressions around him. Faces reflected amazement, eyes glistening, and some people appeared moved in a way that went beyond words. The billionaire, sitting near the front, kept his eyes closed as he absorbed every chord, every pause, and every subtle variation in tempo. He was captivated by the emotional honesty of the performance. The young man's fingers danced across the keys, following intuition and feeling, translating years of solitude and personal experience into sound. The melodies carried layers of emotion, weaving together hope, sorrow, longing, and quiet joy. Each note resonated deeply, not only in the room but seemingly in the hearts of all who were listening. It was not just technical skill that drew them in, but the vulnerability, the humanity, and the truth behind every movement of the hands. As the music ended, there was a moment when no one spoke. The room seemed suspended in a quiet reverence, as if acknowledging the rare and intimate connection that had occurred. The young man sat at the piano, chest rising and falling, hands still poised above the keys, unsure if he should move, speak, or simply breathe. The experience was overwhelming, a mixture of exhilaration and humility. He had never imagined his music having such power, such reach. For years it had been his private sanctuary, a language that only he understood, yet here it was, touching strangers' hearts in ways he could not have foreseen. Then applause erupted, tentative at first, then swelling into a cascade of clapping, cheers, and murmurs of admiration. People rose to their feet, some moved to tears, others smiling broadly, captivated by the depth and beauty of the performance. The young man felt a wave of emotion rush through him, a blend of relief, pride, and disbelief. This was what he had dreamed of, though never dared to believe it could happen. Recognition, understanding, and the profound experience of sharing something so personal and meaningful. The applause felt not only like validation but like an embrace, a quiet acknowledgement that his music mattered. Audience members approached him after the performance, eager to express their reactions. Some spoke about how the melodies reminded them of memories they had long forgotten. Others described feeling emotions they could not name. Questions about composition, inspiration, and technique were asked politely, and the young man, still in awe, answered humbly. He felt a sense of connection forming, a bridge built by the piano and the music it produced. The experience revealed something profound. Music had the power to unite, to speak across differences, and to reach places in the human heart that words often could not. The billionaire approached him personally, a smile of genuine admiration on his face. He spoke softly, acknowledging the impact of the music and expressing a desire to support the young man's talent further. The conversation was simple, yet it carried weight, hinting at possibilities and opportunities the young man had never considered. For a moment, he felt as though he were standing on the edge of a new world, one where his music could expand beyond private rooms into stages. Recordings and perhaps even lives transformed by the sound he created. The encounter was both humbling and inspiring, reinforcing the idea that dedication, emotion, and honesty could resonate far beyond the solitude in which they were nurtured. After the event, as he walked through the quiet streets toward his apartment, the city felt different. The lights seemed brighter, the air carried a sense of possibility, and the familiar streets, once ordinary, now seemed full of promise. He reflected on the journey that had led him to this moment, the years of practice in solitude, the recording of a simple video shared online, the cautious decision to accept an invitation, and now, the profound impact of performing for an audience that truly listened. It was a journey that taught him the value of perseverance, the importance of vulnerability, and the unexpected ways life could reward dedication and passion. Returning home, he sat at his piano once more. The instrument felt familiar, yet charged with the memory of the evening's performance. He played slowly, savoring each note, reflecting on the emotions he had shared and the connections he had made. The melodies carried both his past and the anticipation of the future. The experience had shifted something deep inside him, the understanding that music was not only a personal refuge, but also a powerful medium for connection, capable of reaching beyond solitude into hearts he had never known. It was a realization that brought both comfort and excitement, a sense that the journey was far from over. The days that followed were filled with reflection and quiet joy. The young man continued his routine, working at the cafe, practicing at home, and living simply, yet everything felt enriched by the knowledge that his music had touched others. He revisited compositions he had once considered private, exploring new variations and improvisations with renewed confidence. The piano, once a companion in solitude, had become a bridge to the world, a channel for expression that could evoke deep and meaningful emotions in others. He felt a sense of purpose, a clarity that had been missing before, and it fueled both his practice and his imagination. Occasionally, he would receive messages from people who had attended the event or watched recordings, sharing how the music had affected them. Each message was a reminder of the impact of his dedication, a quiet affirmation that the emotions he had poured into the keys resonated beyond himself. He began to see music not only as personal expression, but as a gift to be shared, a way to connect with strangers and communicate feelings that words often failed to capture. The realization brought both humility and motivation, inspiring him to continue creating and sharing, to explore the depths of his talent and the breadth of its reach. In the quiet of his apartment, he often reflected on the journey from private practice to public performance. He remembered the countless hours spent alone at the piano, the melodies that had filled empty rooms, the self-doubt, and the quiet joy that music had always provided. Now those experiences were part of a larger story, one that included recognition, connection, and the realization that his talent could touch lives. It was a profound shift, a transformation that balanced humility with hope, solitude with connection, and private creation with public sharing. As he continued to play, he felt a sense of continuity, a thread connecting the young man who had practiced alone in a small apartment to the musician who had moved hearts in a crowded room. The piano remained his constant companion, yet it now also served as a messenger, a bridge between inner emotion and outer expression. Each note, each melody, each subtle variation became a testament to perseverance, passion, and the transformative power of art. The experience had opened a new chapter, one filled with possibility, gratitude, and the understanding that music, when played with sincerity, could transcend boundaries, connect souls, and change lives in ways both unexpected and profound. After the performance that had touched so many hearts, the young man's life began to change in ways he had never imagined. The billionaire approached him again, not just to praise his music, but to offer tangible support. He spoke of opportunities to record professionally, to refine his technique with skilled instructors, and to share his music with a wider audience. At first, the young man felt overwhelmed. He had never considered himself as someone who could perform beyond the quiet walls of his apartment. The thought of recording an album or playing in front of thousands of people seemed distant and almost unbelievable. Yet, there was a quiet excitement within him, a sense that his life was entering a new chapter that held promise and possibility. He spent the next few weeks learning to navigate this unexpected path. The billionaire introduced him to experienced musicians, composers, and teachers who could help him refine his skills while preserving the authenticity that made his playing unique. He practiced daily, balancing the demands of work, training, and personal time. The learning process was rigorous but fulfilling. Each lesson added depth to his understanding of music, while still allowing the raw emotion he had cultivated over years to remain central. The piano, once solely a source of comfort and solitude, had now become a gateway to growth and new experiences. During this period, he also began to explore recording techniques. He learned about sound engineering, layering melodies, and subtle adjustments that could enhance the music without compromising its sincerity. He discovered the intricacies of producing an album, a world entirely different from playing in his apartment. Despite the technical challenges, he approached each task with curiosity and dedication. The process was enlightening, revealing that music could be both deeply personal and yet crafted for a broader audience. It was a balance between heart and technique, creativity and structure, freedom and discipline. As his confidence grew, he started performing in small, intimate gatherings organized by the Billionaire's network. Each performance brought new experiences, emotions, and feedback. He met people from diverse backgrounds who were moved by his music in ways he had never anticipated. Some shared personal stories, recounting moments in their lives that his melodies had touched. Others simply listened in silence, closing their eyes and letting the music speak directly to their hearts. Each encounter reinforced the power of his gift, and he began to realize that his music was not only for himself, but for others as well. It had the ability to connect, heal, and inspire. The young man also reflected on how far he had come from the quiet nights in his apartment, playing for no one but himself. Those nights had shaped his music, giving it authenticity and depth. He realized that his solitude had been a foundation, a space where he could explore his emotions freely, without pressure or judgment. Now, as he shared his music with the world, he carried that history with him, infusing every performance with honesty and vulnerability. The balance between private growth and public sharing became a guiding principle, reminding him that the music's power lay in its sincerity. As months passed, his reputation as a pianist began to grow. People from the arts community noticed his talent, and invitations to perform at larger venues arrived. He approached each opportunity cautiously, mindful of maintaining the integrity of his music. With each performance, he grew more comfortable on stage, more confident in his ability to communicate through the piano. The experience that had once seemed unimaginable became a part of his life, a reality that blended excitement with responsibility. He learned to appreciate the journey itself, understanding that success was not only measured by recognition, but by the depth of emotion conveyed through each note. Amid these developments, the young man never lost sight of his roots. He continued to play in his small apartment, preserving the intimate connection he had always felt with the piano. These private sessions remained sacred, a space for reflection, creativity, and emotional release. He understood that the public recognition and professional opportunities were extensions of his passion, not replacements for the personal bond he had with his music. This balance kept him grounded, reminding him of where he had started and why he played in the first place. One evening, after a successful performance at a small hall, he returned home and sat at his piano, feeling both tired and fulfilled. He reflected on the journey, the years of solitary practice, the hesitant sharing of a simple video, the unexpected attention of a billionaire who believed in him, and the gradual unfolding of opportunities that had followed. The memories were vivid, a tapestry of moments that had shaped his path. He played softly, letting the notes carry both gratitude and anticipation, a reminder that music had the power to connect past, present, and future in a seamless flow. He also began mentoring young musicians who shared his passion, offering guidance and encouragement as they explored their own talents. He understood the importance of nurturing potential and inspiring others, just as he had been inspired. The act of sharing knowledge and supporting emerging artists became a meaningful aspect of his life, reinforcing the idea that music was not only about personal expression, but also about community and connection. Through teaching, he discovered a new dimension of fulfillment, a sense of contribution that extended beyond performance. Over time, he started to envision larger projects, collaborations with other musicians, composing pieces for films and performing in concerts that reached wider audiences. The possibilities seemed endless, and he approached each one with care and dedication. He remembered the humble beginnings, the quiet apartment, the worn piano, the private practice, and he carried that perspective into every new endeavor. It kept him humble, focused, and deeply connected to the essence of his music. Each step forward was guided by the understanding that talent alone was not enough. Emotion, sincerity, and perseverance were equally important. As the years passed, he continued to grow both as a musician and as a person. His life had expanded in ways he had never anticipated, filled with experiences, connections, and achievements that began from a place of quiet determination and love for music. He had discovered that even in solitude, one could cultivate something extraordinary, and that the world could respond to sincerity in ways that were unexpected and transformative. The piano remained at the center of his life, a constant companion, teacher, and bridge to new possibilities. Looking back, he realized that the journey had been about more than recognition or success. It had been about understanding the power of expression, the importance of following one's passion, and the beauty of sharing something deeply personal with the world. His music had carried him from isolation to connection, from quiet practice to transformative experiences, and it continued to open doors he had never imagined. Each note, each melody, each performance was a testament to the journey, a reminder that dedication, courage, and authenticity could create change both within and beyond oneself. In the quiet moments at home, he would play, sometimes for himself, sometimes imagining an audience, always feeling the same connection he had when he first discovered the joy of the piano. The journey had taught him resilience, patience, and the value of following one's heart. The opportunities he had received were remarkable, yet they were meaningful because they came after years of dedication and quiet effort. He had learned that talent, when combined with persistence and sincerity, could transform lives, not only his own but those of others who listened, felt, and connected through the music. The piano had been the key to this transformation, and he cherished it deeply. He understood that this was just the beginning. The path ahead was full of potential, new challenges, and unforeseen experiences, yet he felt ready, equipped with the lessons of his past, the skill and authenticity of his present, and the hope and vision for his future. Music was no longer just a refuge. It was a bridge, a means to touch hearts, inspire, and connect. As he sat at the piano, playing softly, he felt a profound sense of gratitude and fulfillment, knowing that the journey that began in quiet solitude had led to a life of purpose, connection, and endless possibilities. The music continued, flowing from his heart to the keys and onward into the world.